Hello everybody. I was thinking let's make another video in English, and I've noticed lately that there is a lot of videos going around that are kind of in a negative vibe. It seems to be a bit of a trend, as far as you can call it a trend. In the end it's just us here, a bunch of old geezers throwing names around. But I'm not into that, so I don't feel like making a video about the 10 bands I hate the most and the musicians that get on my nerves the most and the music I find most disgusting. It's not like I like everything. I think on the contrary, the opposite case is that my taste is rather specialized. But let me move this a little bit. This doesn't look good. Yeah, this doesn't look either. Maybe that's the problem here. Ah, let's do it like that, huh? What do you think? Alright, so where was my train of thought? So I never felt like making negative comments about music, about musicians. We did that back in the day, like if you lived through the 80s, this was kind of our game. You know, you stood by the flag of some band, Black Sabbath maybe, and everybody else was just an asshole. So basically, it's an interesting aspect of the 80s that everything was subdivided into these islands, and you would defend this kind of island with a vengeance. Particularly if you grew up in a small town, because then there were the kids who were like all into thrash heavy metal, which was a very new thing around 1984-85, or there were still some punks hanging around, and then there were this entire kind of disgusting pop crowd listening to MTV, and we didn't like them. But of course I was this typical loner, probably the only guy in the entire small town listening to progressive rock, so this immediately made you kind of an outsider. So this kind of thinking doesn't exist anymore. But I definitely one day realized that I just don't want to be the person that is tainting somebody's experience with music. So music is your own journey, it's your own trajectory. I certainly enjoy being a bit of a tastemaker from time to time and open some doors and say, maybe you want to look inside this door and maybe you find it interesting what you find there. But I don't want to be a music critic, and I don't want to be the guy that that looks at you while you're showing me some record you like and tells you, oh, I think this is all shit. I hate this. This is just... It's something about it never sat well with me. Anyway, this video here is exactly the opposite. So I'm even doubling down on my attitude. This is a video about 10 albums that basically everybody hates, but I kind of like, or even pretty much love. Now, these 10 albums are kind of ranked, which means the first 4 albums that I will show you, I don't love them. I don't think they are great, but I find them very interesting, very intriguing, and somehow fascinating. I can perceive them with a certain tongue in the cheek, but I have found ways to enjoy them. Now the other 6 albums, that's where I become more uncompromising, because those 6 albums I think are fantastic, great records, almost flawless, I would say. So let's begin. Let's start the game. Now the first one, my number 10 in my quasi-ranked list. My number 10, let's move the obvious one out of the way. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Love Beach. Is it a great album? Absolutely not. There's a reason why it's on place number 10 of my ranking here. I don't think it's a great album. It's a very well recorded album. I think Carl Palmer's drumming here is outstanding. It's very muscular, while at the same time you can kind of listen how Palmer is playing when it's not all about creating these complicated structures in his drumming, so it is all much more straightforward. The lyrics are completely goofy, sure, but it is also somehow hilarious that they still have to hire Pete Sinfield to help Greg Lake with the lyrics, because the lyrics do sound like written by a 15-year-old kid fantasizing about having sex with Raquel Welch or something like that. That is true. I guess there's a tongue-in-cheek required here. Although I would say the B-side is pretty fantastic. I'm not entirely into the pathos it tries to evoke in the lyrics of this kind of big 20-minute piece about how would you call it, about sort of a Britannica. But musically it's pretty great. Now a lot has been said about the cover. Personally, I really like the cover. Yes, yeah. If this revolts you, just go to the shed, man. Go to the shed and pound sand. I think if you are a homophobic, overweight, bearded, progressive rock fan, unhappily married with ungrateful children, carefully hiding your DVD porn collection of Asian porn somewhere in the garage so wifey doesn't find it, well then you certainly hate this cover, I'm sure. But I like it. I always fantasized about making a giant poster out of this and just having this poster over my bed just to mess with people's minds. Anyway, I don't need to talk that much about it. I'm not saying it's a great album. I'm just saying that people are really going a little bit too much overboard with shredding it to pieces. It has become like this kind of a progressive rock monolith of hate. Yeah, it's a cute, weird, completely idiosyncratic pop album in a way, but I think it's still better than anything ever recorded under the so-called category of Britpop. Number 9. Oh, I've talked about this album a lot, actually, mostly in German. On my Albenrevue series, I'm talking about Union by Yes. Now, people hate this album. They hate it so much. It's almost impossible. Members of Yes hate this album so much. First of all, what I do not accept are all these arguments made by members of Yes why this album sucks. Because this album was recorded by very seasoned, experienced musicians, and you can't, after everything goes to hell, basically, you can't go public and say, well, this and this person, this producer and this happened and this is the worst album I ever played on. No, if anything like that happened, then you have to explain to me how somebody who's a band that is so experienced, how could you have allowed the project to be taken away from you in such a way that at the end you feel like you have been ostracized within the project and you basically don't know what happened and this is not me playing this and this has been changed and blah blah. Well, again, you are the pros. How is this supposed to happen? There's a reason for that, because when this album was recorded, most of those guys that were whining afterwards were completely stoned all the time and didn't give a shit. They cared if the check is in the mail, yeah, but they certainly didn't care if the music is good or bad. They were just kind of going through the motions. But on the other hand, there are people involved in this who actually did care. People like Tony Levin, people like John Anderson, most certainly people like Jonathan Elias. And those guys certainly brought some interesting elements into the record to create a result that is messy, but interesting. So I'm not saying this is a great record, but I'm saying there are some really good and really interesting songs on this. And I don't think it should be forgotten. It should not disappear in the fog of history just because some self-proclaimed guardians of the prog are telling you what to listen and what not. So there are tracks which I really like. For example, Without Hope You Cannot Start the Day is a great song. Silent Talking is actually fantastic. The More We Live, Let Go is a track written by Chris Squire, fantastic. Angkor Wat is this kind of a ambient type of fourth world composition by Rick Wakeman. Excellent. There are even little beautiful tiny jams like Evensong, which is this little composition recorded by Tony Levin and Bill Bruford. Pretty great. So yeah, you can tell me whatever you want, but I think this is a very interesting album. It's not a great album. There's a whole bunch of tracks that I don't like because I find them too corny, mostly kind of coming from the Trevor Rabin Song Factory at this point in time. But does this album deserve all the hate and all the shit and all the slagging off? I don't think so. I think compared with the other stuff, I would say this is one of the two best albums they recorded in the 90s, most certainly. I mean, if you want to compare this with Talk or with The Ladder, give me a fucking break. So, and don't get me started on Open Your Eyes. I mean, what's wrong with you? Anyway, number 8 is Trance by Neil Young. Now, I need to confess that I'm really not a Neil Young fan. This type of music has never drawn me in. I've never liked his band and his music, and I don't know, this all sounds too much. It's just not this is not appealing music to me. So this is basically the only Neil Young album that I like and that I find really fascinating. I mean, for me, this album is 50 times more important than Harvest. Really. So the first track, called Little Thing Called Love, has been probably somehow shoehorned by the pressure of Geffen Records because it's the only album that doesn't seem to belong on this record. It's just exactly this type of obnoxious kind of Americana sound that I basically can't stand. But everything coming after that is this crazy music, most certainly influenced by Devo, Kraftwerk, Talking Heads material. So it's this mixture of electronica combined with this kind of a sharp, no-wave, post-punk sound that was becoming so prevalent in 1979. And this album came out in 1982, so I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking, because at this point in 1982 everybody knew where the tracks of kind of the musical development are laid, and this is not a groundbreaking album. It's more like a reflective album. It's a bit derivative, one could say, but I kind of like this very dark vibe, but combined with this sort of a disco-ish atmosphere. So it's really a great sort of cyberpunk soundtrack, I feel. So yeah, people don't like this album. This is the one Neil Young album that's always being dismissed like this big mistake he made. He should not have made this. Terrible, terrible. What a spot. What a dirty spot on his otherwise spotless career. I don't care. This is really a wonderful record, and I do enjoy listening to. I tend to skip the first track. Well, it's rather short, so most of the time I wouldn't bother to skip it. It's like over after 3 minutes, but then the good stuff begins, and so it's kind of funny. Neil Young going electronic. I think first of all, it's a hilarious idea. Most of the time I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm sure most of the time you don't understand what I'm saying, because it's probably not the proper use of the language. I'm just experimenting here. Creating new semantic structures. I have my notes here. I wrote down all these albums and made just few remarks, just what I want to mention. Now, number 7. This kind of annoys me, honestly. So, Endless River, Pink Floyd. I totally disagree with everything people ever said about this album, particularly on YouTube. I don't get it. Sorry. I actually think this is a great record. I love the sound of it. I love the vibe of it. I don't fully understand what people don't like about it. Now, I've been into ambient music for 35 years now, so you kind of can't sell me on the idea that an album that is droney must be bad because there is not much happening. That's not how I think about music, so that argument does not work for me. I've been always puzzled back in the day, in the 80s and late 70s, when I heard people talking about Pink Floyd, because there was always this talk about how they make cosmic, atmospheric music. Where I was thinking, but where? You can listen through the entire catalog of the 70s. Where is the cosmic, atmospheric music? There's like, you can probably distill like 10 minutes of cosmic, atmospheric music from there, from out of 3 or 4 tracks. The rest of it is just the psychedelic, bluesy, semi-prog Pink Floyd sound. There's nothing cosmic and atmospheric about it. So when they finally deliver a real atmospheric kind of cosmic album, people get pissed off. Oh, it's not like Dark Side of the... It's not like Animals, man! Animals is not that great. I mean, you should stop masturbating over it. It's really becoming disgusting. Seriously. So, yeah, you can make the argument that large parts of this album feel kind of derivative, like a pastiche of the good old days, and certainly some parts of it feel like kind of the second half of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. You can even hear Richard Wright quoting himself to some extent. So one could make the argument that they try too hard to make certain things sound too Pink Floydian. Yeah, I get it. No one said this is a mind-blowing work of genius. No, that it is not. But I find it interesting. I find it charming. I like actually the atmosphere. I like how it flows. I guess the problem is that in my world, creating something that others would describe as music for the background is not a minus. It's not something that I consider being an insult. So a lot of types of music are lending themselves to exactly that, and there's nothing wrong with it. If there is one thing I deeply hate about this album, then it's the cover. This is by far the worst Pink Floyd cover. I mean, this kind of shit you expect on, I don't know, somewhere on a French train station, where on a postcard stand. This kind of cheesy nonsense, and that's a shame, because one thing you can say, every single Pink Floyd cover up until now was in some way aesthetically or stylistically or visually interesting or expressive or had something to say. I know what they're trying to say here, but it just has basically no artistic merit. This is basically AI shit before AI came out. So, but again, this is not a problematic album for me, and so I've never understood why people are so agonizing over it and what they have expected to come out of this. Like, what, Dark Side of the Moon Part 2? You knew this is not gonna happen. Anyway, all these albums up until now in this ranking I consider problematic but approachable with a certain attitude. So I'm not saying those are great albums, I'm saying those are interesting albums, those are albums that deserve a second look, and that punctually do deliver some very interesting musical material. It should not be just dismissed as a whole. But all the albums coming now, which is continuing with number 6, so the following 6 albums I consider really perfect. Those are outstanding records, mind-blowing outstanding records, some of my best albums I know, and are being vilified without end. They're really hated amongst all the other nerds like me. So let's continue. Number 6, Kilroy Was Here by Styx. Now this is a very great example for the format of this video, because people hate this album with a vengeance, but I think this is one of the best records of the 80s. Incredible compositions. I mean, the songwriting between Dennis DeYoung, Tommy Shaw and James Young is outstanding here. I know that they probably intended to kill each other in the studio, but that's neither here nor there. All I have is the result, and the result is outstanding. This is a brilliant record. Now, it's true that I don't care that much about the whole concept behind it. For me, this is just a highly functioning, highly efficient pop and rock album. Just listen to songs like Just Get Through This Night or Double Life, or the incredible Haven't We Been Here Before, High Time, Cold War. This is just track by track, super fascinating stuff. And I find this record really top, kind of a 5-star record. It's just, for me, a brilliant album from the beginning till the end. Very iconic, actually. And yeah, I guess I don't think Dennis DeYoung's idea to bring this on a stage like a kind of a wild, crazy opera and forcing his bandmates to kind of participate in that, this was probably not the best idea. I think it would have been enough if they just performed material from this album just as part of a concert, which I think they did as well. I don't think they... I don't know exactly how much they actually toured this whole thing as this kind of rock opera performance. I know there's all kind of video footage about that, and I never thought it's too great to have some weird dancing robots on stage. But musically, this is amazing stuff and a fantastic record. I think it's now number 5. I stopped numbering them and now I'm losing track of the count. Yeah, number 5. JethroTull.com. The one band that is included twice in my list here. So this is the first Tull album that I'm breaking the lance for. When I watch ranking videos about Jethro Tull, this record gets so much shit, you could fertilize a whole field with that. But I love this record. In my book, this is probably their best album, or the best of 2 albums they did in the 90s. The sound most of the time is rather heavy and quite proggy. The opener Spiral is great, but the second track, the title track .com, is just brilliant. I like AWOL, which is an outstanding track, kind of echoing the sound of the 70s. Hunt by Numbers with this ultra heavy riff at the center of the song is pretty great. But my favorite track here is probably El Nino. Now, this is one of the best Tull songs actually I know. And I don't know, just please push the pause button, go and listen to El Nino by Jethro Tull, and then come back and tell me that it's a piece of shit. Just please do that. Do that. Tell me how it is a bad song. So, again, I think this album has some great observational lyrics. Martin Barr is on fire here. Andrew Giddings' keyboard playing is outstanding. I think stylistically this album is a kind of a sibling to Rupee's Dance, Ian Anderson's solo album that came out in a kind of similar frame of time. I don't know. I guess one of the problems of this record is that the graphic design on cover has a penis being shown there, and of course if you're a progressive rock fan, then you spend the rest of the time just talking about the penis and not the music, because again most of them are completely homophobic. But I think this is a great album, and I've never understood why people hate it so much. and why people slug it off like that, always saying, yeah, this was just a throwaway album where Anderson wanted to promote his URL for his new Jethro Tull website, so that's why he called it .com. Anyway, number 4, and that's a really great album, Ramshackled by Alan White. This album is getting a lot of shit since 1976, and I think it's a masterpiece. So this record is mostly written by the guys from the band Griffin and musicians around Alan Price. And yeah, it's an uneven record, it's highly eclectic, it's all over the place. There is not really a kind of a stylistic thread leading through this album. And if you have a problem with that, then you have a problem with the record, probably. But I find it such an wonderful, energetic journey. I never understood why people would not get this record a bit of a chance. I can fully understand why Yes fans don't get it, because there's nothing particularly proggy about it. If there are any kind of leanings towards a, let's say, sophisticated music, then it's mostly towards jazz fusion, if anything. But I would say it's kind of a jazz rock album with a lot of soul music and occasionally borrowing kind of elements of maybe Caribbean music, maybe even a bit of a reggae. When I reviewed it on my album review video series, I gave it 4 stars. But I mean, there are days when I listen to this album and feel like, yeah, it's actually a 5-star album. It's like massively underrated record. And so I just find it extremely charming, very exciting, kind of killer album. On the B-side there's a track called Silly Woman, which I don't like that much because it's kind of a reggae track, and I have nothing against reggae, but often when a bunch of white dudes in England create a reggae song, it kind of more sounds like a parody of reggae. But I don't know. Overall, this is a fantastic album, and I certainly will keep saying that as long as I can. Now we're getting to the last 3 albums in my list here, and these last 3 albums are being hated to an incredible degree, to a shocking degree. And I find all these 3 albums, I find them awesome and outstanding. Really true masterpieces. So number 3, It's Hard by The Who. Now I have 2 favorite Who albums. One of them is Who's Next, and the other one is It's Hard. And again, I kind of consider both records rather equal, honestly. So yeah, if your brain is breaking over this, then again, go and pound sand. But I'm listening to snubbing of this album for 40 years now, and I just don't get it. It's Hard is a brilliant album. I find the songwriting outstanding here. There's a wonderful sense of urgency in the songs. I think this is also the album where the compositions by John Entwistle are really the best. I mean, the tracks he wrote for this record, they almost equal the rest of the album, meaning the songs written by Pete Townsend. So at this point, these 2 guys are like really 2 equal songwriters on this album, and it works really well. Daltrey delivers some of his best vocal performances I've ever heard him doing. There's some wonderful singing here. And this entire album is just such a fun. The sound is punchy. There are certainly a lot of callbacks to this kind of old mod Who sound, but at the same time it's just combined with this more like a contemporary look at the 80s, at Britain in the 80s, at neoliberalism and the upcoming world of elites. And I think people missed all that. I think this is an album that will come back slowly into kind of public consciousness, and beyond Eminence Front, which is like the one track from here that is being constantly played in some music reactions, and everybody's like, oh wow, yeah, oh this is the Who. I never thought, man, I've always known this song. So yeah, it's not a typical Who album. Yeah, it's more like a sophisticated pop album. I certainly never could accept all the critique and all the shit that people were giving Kenny Jones for drumming here. It's kind of the same situation like with this Union album by Yes. It's not Kenny Jones's fault that Keith Moon has not been sober for 10 years. Yeah, it's not his fault. This is an outstanding drummer, and he's a perfect drummer for this record. People say, oh, he's not the perfect drummer for The Who. Yeah, that's probably true. Probably no one is. Yes, I get it. But he's a really great drummer for this type of music and for this album, and I still think this is one of the best records by The Who, and certainly my favorite. So, last two albums. Number 2, Eve by the Alan Parsons Project. Now this one has really puzzled me, because all the albums that came before Eve and after Eve are being kind of lauded and complimented for being these great, groundbreaking records, and this one usually gets all the critique, and I never really understood why. For a long time this was probably my favorite Alan Parsons Project album, but over time it just gave the scepter away to maybe iRobot, maybe Turnover Friendly Card a bit, the debut maybe. I don't know. I think when I did my Alan Parsons Project ranking, this still ended up on place number 2. And this was the one point of contention where people wrote in the comments, what do you mean by number 2? Are you crazy? People didn't call me crazy. In context of that video, honestly, they call me crazy in context of my Jethro Tull ranking, but we'll get to that. I think this is a wonderful album. The compositions are great. The production is, of course, great. I think particularly Lenny Zakatek's singing is marvelous here. Some of the best songs he sang on, just beautiful, beautiful. I love this vibe and sound of this album, this kind of all these elements of funk and disco that are suddenly interwoven into this rather atmospheric and sort of highly emotional music, and the lyrics are engaging, which is not something you would expect from an Alan Parsons Project album, but this time they kind of went to town with all kind of let's call it the gender issues that are almost making it a weird kind of concept album. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing cold or distant about this album. It feels all very intimate, and at the same time it's such a beautifully dynamic album that feels like a horse ride, and I think it's fantastic. One of the greatest records that I know. It's just really, really wonderful. And that leads us to my number 1. The greatest injustice in the history of rock music. And of course I'm talking about Under Wraps by Jethro Tull. For me, a five-star album that I find amazing from beginning to the end. And this is probably one of the most savaged albums on YouTube when it comes to like VC videos and progressive rock, sort of talking heads that talk about records like I do. And I know when they pick up on this record, it's just an orgy of dismissal and slagging off and just throwing feces at it by the tons. But I'm not part of this kind of gray area camp of people saying that this is actually a good album with great songs and it's great singing by Anderson, but if he only would record it again, but this time with a real drummer, because particularly the prog rock fans never forgave Anderson for recording a whole record without a drummer, just with a drum computer. This is 1984. So this is like 3 months before Age of Consent by Bronski Beat came out. So we are now in the middle of like Frankie Goes to Hollywood era and Being Boiled. So there's a certain vibe in the air. But at the same time, the way that Ian Anderson, with the help of Peter John Vatassi, just picked up this whole conceptual idea of creating sort of a techno-rock album, it's so unique. Yes, it may be a complete stylistic cul-de-sac, but at the same time, they created something that's just a category of its own. It's a one-of-a-kind album in a sense. I mean, not entirely. Again, I would kind of pair it with Ian Anderson's solo album that he released 1 year earlier. These two albums have a very, very similar vibe. They are created under very similar circumstances. So for me, this is actually a beautiful double album to listen to those two records in a row. So I think this album sounds as it should sound. I'm not waiting for some great Steve Wilson remix or re-recording with a real drummer or something like that. Sooner or later, this will probably happen. Why will it happen? Because sooner or later somebody will infuse into Ian Anderson's head the idea that you could actually make money with that. If you put a real drummer and have him record all the songs, why not? Might turn out good. But it's not important to me. I like the drum machine sound because it's exactly what it's supposed to be. Yes, is it a product of its time? Yes. That's what people call the music sounds dated. But I never understood the philosophical concept behind dated music. Because if you say good music is always very universal and timeless, and this universalness and this timelessness is what makes it great, yes, but often something sounding universal can be very boring. So I don't mind something being a representation of its time, because that's what it should be. That's what it's meant to be. This album sounds like nothing else, basically, and I find it outstanding. Really outstanding. And I like the mood of it. I like the lyrics of it, the kind of observational approach. There's a lot about the atmosphere of Europe in the 80s, the division between West and East, and just the overall culture. I would say, while at the same time, all those top of the pop electronica musicians had just been this byproduct of the British Maggie Thatcher neoliberalism. Anderson is already going one step further and already probing the whole concept with his lyrics on this album, and already uncovering the mechanisms that are underlying. And I could blather and blather and blather, but I think we're at the end of this video here, and I will never tire to promote this record and trying to explain to people that it's actually fantastic, and that you probably didn't give it its own proper chance. But I mean, it's a subjective game. If you don't like it, you don't like it. I mean, I understand that. I understand that because there are fantastic bands and musicians that people try to kind of put under my palette for many, many years, and it just doesn't work. And it's probably the same situation. So it's not like I'm different than anybody else. There are wonderful, famous albums in the world that I just hate and dislike and think that just nails on the chalk for me. But I guess some of those records that I've shown you here and now are the same for you. I'm not trying to convince anybody. I'm not even sure why I made this video right now. But could this not be said about 90% of all YouTube videos, honestly? So, yeah. Let's stop right here. Goodbye. And to finish off on a positive note, you'll get to see a cat for a couple seconds.